Secrets and Spies presents Espresso Martini with Chris Carr and Matt Fulton.
Hello everybody and welcome to our first episode of Espresso Martini at the beginning of our latest season, Season 9. Before we kick off, I just wanted to point out that this podcast is obviously entering its 9th year, which I think is pretty amazing. And Matt, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to you for all your efforts on the show. And I just wanted to thank everybody out there who's listening. You know, we've been going for, 9 years. We're starting on 9th year, so we've been going for 8 years. And it's been quite a journey. And the podcast has sort of evolved from being once a month to almost weekly now. And obviously we've got plans afoot for this season. So this year, one of our goals is to sort of transition slowly into video. Later, Espresso Martinis as we go on will be both filmed and recorded. And so what you might find is some of the edits might be a bit looser than what you're used to. There'll be a lot more umming and ahhing just because, unfortunately, video doesn't cut so well as audio. So I hope my IQ doesn't drop by like 10 points through that process because it might well do so.
You see us for how we really are.
Yeah, suddenly the curtain's thrown back. But and next week I'm recording my first ever studio-based interview just because I wanted to see if I could get a couple of nice looking videos for YouTube just to get us going, and then in time when we've got the right guest and the right opportunity, sort of do a few sort of video specials. So more news about that to come over the next sort of few weeks. But before we kick off as well, Matt, how are you and how was your summer? Because this is our first sort of on-air chat since the summer.
I know it feels like we've been off for like a while. I was getting ready for this one. I was like, wait, how do we do these episodes again? It sure took me a minute. But yeah, I've been good. Thank you for all the kind words about the podcast. This has been a really kind of a cool ride, seeing how it's really developed. I mean, I don't think we had really, this like clear cut of a plan of how it would sort of grow and evolve and everything. It just sort of just did naturally, and we're just sort of doing what kind of, I don't know, sticks and makes sense. But,
trying to keep nimble and keep on top of what we think's working, and then sort of finesse what we think's not quite working. But I hope we're doing all right. Certainly, we've been doing this amazing survey, and if you haven't taken part in it yet, the link will be in the show notes. But we've had quite a lot of participants in that, and it's just been really sort of humbling and interesting to see what people's sort of view on the show has been. And largely it's been very positive, and there's been a few constructive points that were taken on board, but generally it's been a very sort of positive process, and it just reassures us that at least what we're doing at the moment is pretty much we're doing okay, and it doesn't sound like you want us to radically change the show. We won't film it. As I was saying jokingly on a few episodes ago, I won't shave my head and do steroids or anything to enhance the show. I might
We're not
try
going
to
join the manosphere.
Yeah, the manosphere. Oh my goodness, can you imagine?
We're not going to cash in on that money.
Get some Russian. No? Yeah, we need to get some Russian money for the next election cycle because I think we missed this one. But there we go. So so just thank you everybody who has taken part, and anybody who's considering, thank you in advance. And hopefully over the next few months you'll see a few little tweaks here and there, but hopefully the experience won't change too dramatically from what you're used to. And we're keeping an eye on all the sort of tech points. There's been one or two comments about, on some episodes, the odd sort of variation in audio levels, and we'll do our best to kind of keep an eye on that. So let's move into what we're going to be discussing today. So on Espresso Martini, we're going to be looking at tortured teens and a terrorist plot in Vienna that targeted a Taylor Swift concert. And then we're going to be looking at the arrest of Telegram's founder in France. Then we will be looking at, as we've already briefly talked about, US influencers in the pay of Russia. And then we're going to wrap up taking a look at the heads of MI6 and the CIA appearing on stage together in the UK. Then on Extra Shop, which is our Patreon-only show, and you can get access to it by clicking on the link in the show notes, we're going to look at stochastic terrorism, which is using disgust to fuel violence. Then we're going to take a peek into the AP3 militia group in the US. And then finally, we're going to look at the rise of a globally integrated ISIS that seems to be coming back, or maybe never went in the first place. So, Matt, we will start with your piece about the connection with tortured teens and terrorism, which, is quite an eye-opener and a bit of a concerning kind of link, really. So I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, this was a piece by Farah, Pandith, and Jacob Ware, who's been on here a couple times. Really great counterterrorism analyst. Just looks at extremism in general. So yeah, he wrote an article about the plot to attack a Taylor Swift concert in Vienna in August. So I'm excited to talk about it here. A couple key points from it. The foiled terror plot at a Taylor Swift concert in Vienna in August underscores how teenagers are being increasingly radicalized online. The 3 teens arrested had been influenced by the Islamic State, joining a concerning global trend of younger individuals being drawn into extremist ideologies. Extremist ideologies thrive on platforms like X, formerly Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, where algorithms amplify hateful content. Despite capturing detailed user data, tech companies have failed to address this issue meaningfully, making only surface-level changes to their platforms. While Europe has taken proactive steps, such as the EU's 2022 internet regulations, U.S. efforts to counter youth extremism are limited. The recent Kids Online Safety Act is a step forward, but much more is needed, including better regulation of tech companies and stronger enforcement against harmful content. Historically, youth movements have been powerful drivers of social change. The article calls for a youthquake, where young people unite online and offline to reject extremism, using their creativity and influence to counter hate, similar to past youth-led initiatives like Greta Thunberg's climate activism and the March for Our Lives movement. Adults should play a supporting role in helping youth combat extremism by empowering young people to lead campaigns in their own authentic way. Governments and civil society can foster peer-driven solutions to address online hate and polarization. Chris, what did you think about this?
Yeah, very interesting piece. I just will quickly say, if you hear any bangs behind me, there's a thunderstorm that's just kicking off in London at the moment. So don't fear, and I apologise for any big bangs. And if you hear a creak, it might be my chair, which I might be considering swapping this season. But anyway, so all that aside, so with regards to that Taylor Swift plot, it is interesting. It was her concert that was targeted, as she's been getting a kind of a lot of attention from alt-right and Andrew Tate-inspired men online, and probably will be getting more attention from them now after she openly endorsed Kamala Harris, didn't she, for her presidential run. Now, even though this was an ISIS-inspired plot, I ask if there was a connection to it with all that online misogyny, or whether she was just targeted because she's obviously was the most prominent person playing in Vienna that time. Could it be that she was just because she was so famous that the plotter decided, I'm going to target that concert, while, a few weeks later it could have been somebody else. Trying to think of somebody as famous as Taylor Swift, but a man. Can you think of an example of somebody who would be as famous as Taylor Swift at the moment, but a bloke? Trying to think of a good analogy there. It's not Elton John.
Oh man. I don't know.
No,
I don't know.
No.
Someone who's comparable, at least today. I don't know. I mean, it really doesn't, like, the size of her fame and the crowds that she draws really doesn't compare to anything right now. I don't think.
No, and certainly talk about crowds driving past Wembley Stadium recently. My God, my wife and I were caught in a bit of a traffic jam because a lot of people were kind of piling into the stadium. So she does draw a huge crowd. And then when I heard about this plot, so the plot led to the cancellation of her concert in Vienna, and it kind of had echoes of the terrible Manchester Arena bombing in 2017. And so with regards to this piece you mentioned, it is deeply worrying that extremist narratives are sweeping up teenagers, and some are then kind of crossing over into acts of terrorism, or have at least been found plotting acts of terrorism in the name of, it's different ideologies. It's not just ISIS inspired. There's sort of far right ideologies, and then there's sort of this incel ideology. I was trying to remember the name for incels because I don't really think about incels that often. So forgive me for that blank there. But
Good for you.
Yeah, I try not to think about them at all, to be honest. But
yeah.
but there we go. But they are one of the unfortunate realities of the kind of world we live in at the moment. It's been, I think it's not that I wish to wish one on, but it's been a little while since we've had an outward incel attack. I think I could be wrong, but it's been a little. I think it's been a little while since somebody's gone out and done something terrible in the name of involuntary celibacy. But there we go.
It blends itself into a lot of other things too. You know, like you'll see all you'll see various stuff that's not exactly like a strictly incel attack, but like the person behind it was definitely somewhat motivated by that blend of disgust and frustration and inadequacy and like rage at the system that fuels these guys to do other things.
Yeah, and it feeds then into this sort of misogynistic outlook and blaming women and stuff, and this sort of hatred of women,
right.
which is
just burn it all down kind of a mindset.
Yeah. And there's somebody somewhere once talked about the link between sex and terrorism, and I'd need to dig into that and find who that was now and interview them. But there certainly is a link between sort of sexual inadequacy and violence. So definitely something there, which obviously with being teenagers and things, obviously you're kind of getting into your hormones and learning all sorts of interesting things about yourself that you didn't realize. So being a teenager obviously is one of the most, I think, difficult parts of your life to navigate a little bit, really. And so this is where you're most vulnerable, because you're kind of in the process of developing your personality, moving away from childhood into adulthood. And it can be quite awkward. And so, having access to the entire world at your fingertips at that age, I think, I think it was you said last season that social media or smartphones should be age restricted. I think it was social media rather than smartphones. But and I think there's a lot to be said for that. But I suppose the practicality of actually policing that's a bit of a different matter, because like if I compare it to watching 18 certificate movies as a kid, so I watched like Die Hard at the age of 12, and that film isn't suitable for a 12-year-old, but I still managed to watch it and enjoy it, as did many of my friends who watched all sorts of films, from horror films to etc. So how do you keep kids off social media until the age of 18? I'm not sure. Obviously it requires parents to be a part of that and teachers, but certainly at a school level, smartphones, etc., could be sort of taken out of the equation in the classroom. But again, kids and technology, kids usually tend to be a lot smarter than the adults who are watching over them and find sort of workarounds to things. So tricky one, that one. And one other interesting note as well, so over August, whilst I was filming at this wonderful Buddhist retreat that was quite frankly one of the best filming experiences I've had in a while, and both quite zen whilst working, there were these terrible riots kind of kicking off across the UK. So it was a real weird juxtaposition of checking in on my phone about these sort of different riots that were kicking off. Then unfortunately had kind of connections to the far right, and they were quite violent. They weren't en masse the same quite as the big riots we had in 2011, but certainly the small pockets of riots that we did have caused a lot of damage, injured a lot of police officers and members of the public, and damaged a lot of property as well. And one of the youngest people arrested was actually 12 years old. And I find that very sad that a 12-year-old has been arrested. Well, I'm not sad that they've been arrested, because if they did what they did, they deserve to be arrested. But I'm just sad that a 12-year-old has managed to get themselves...
It's sad that they found themselves in that situation. That was something that they could have been drawn to at that age, Yeah,
it's so sad. And then on top of that, with that particular individual, there was a hint of parental neglect, because the day of his court case, his mother was on holiday in Ibiza. And so the trial was delayed whilst she was off on holidays. There's been a lot of that in the tabloids over the last few days in the UK, which then leads to the question about how responsible his parent actually is. But again, it's difficult to say. from this sort of point of view without actually knowing the people. So, but certainly parenting, I think, early experience in parenting plays a role, both at home and at school. At school, it could be, kids are getting bullied. It could be they have an undiagnosed learning difficulty as well. So I've been working on this project about dyslexia, and there was a really interesting point that came up that there's a huge crossover between offenders who are in prison who actually had an undiagnosed learning disorder in education, which caused them to leave education early. And so with all that, that means that, that person as a child had a very difficult education and felt very unfulfilled, and didn't leave really with any particular kind of academic skills or anything, and went out into the big bad world. And obviously those individuals ended up turning to crime because they kind of felt like outsiders. So there's definitely something in that early life experience, and I don't want to land the blame on parents or schools, etc., but certainly it's a factor in what probably leads these teenagers to kind of feeling vulnerable, and then I suppose being not sort of maybe should we say supervised enough, where they end up going online and going on to, I don't know, ISIS.com, and ending up in Syria 6 months later. So yeah, so very, very interesting piece there. I'll come back to, I don't know what your sort of thoughts on it all were.
I think the most striking thing that stood out to me from this whole story is the age of the people involved. So it was three males were arrested, 17, 18, and 19, all teenagers who were radicalized entirely online. It's not as if, like, looking back at, say, 2014 or something, where they had traveled to Syria to fight for ISIS on the ground and then came back or something, ready to sort of operationalize that extremism at home. This happened entirely online. And I think, we talked about social media last season and everything, and how I think it's clear now just how totally destructive it is to young people, especially, and that the nature of how these algorithms are constructed to see content that leads to extremism and rage as sort of like fuel that keeps you engaged in the platform, that like endless scroll where you can just sit there all day long. I mean, I've seen it, at least in like my own kind of like recommendations on, I don't know, where something I'm looking at on like YouTube or Reddit or something, where I will, see something that is, I'll look at something that is in, more of like one of the topics that, we talk about on the show, right? And then I'll see, pop up in like the recommendations, something that is clearly bent towards, I mean, I would argue something very, toxic, whether that's the far right or something. And it's just sort of like, for me, at least, it gives me pause. I think I have the skills to recognize what that is, what's being recommended to me, what's being served up to me, without necessarily asking for it, but someone 17 or younger doesn't. And it's just something that just very quickly spirals out of control. And it's absolutely unconscionable to me that we have these, huge tech companies, American companies for the most part, that build their products in ways that bring out the worst in people, that lead people to reinforce their worst selves. It's something that we absolutely have to get a handle on, and it's not something that's just, leading one to, plan a terrorist attack for ISIS. It's all kinds of, whether it's body issues, or we talked about, the incel problem, or whether it's far right extremism or far left extremism, even. It's just unconscionable to me that we're, it's so clear now what these algorithms, what these platforms, the way they're designed and engineered, what they're doing to their users. And I don't understand how there is not more of a concerted effort to get a grip on this. And it's not just young people. It's not just young people.
Yeah, I was going to say
There's
that.
people of all ages whose brains have been completely pickled by this shit online. And families have been destroyed over it.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. So older people as well, kind of interesting in a similar situation to teenagers, because there's quite a few older people out there who still didn't really grow up with social media and YouTube. Right. And they sometimes slip into the mistake of feeling like, oh, if I'm watching it on the internet or if I'm watching it on YouTube, it must be true. And I know I've got a friend whose uncle who has become not radicalized, but become a bit more conspiratorial in his thinking with regards to Ukraine. So, he's sort of basically taken on pro-Russian talking points, and his justification for that is because we can't believe the American intelligence services because they were wrong about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And so basically he watches all these YouTube videos that obviously tend to be take a very pro-Russian look and a very critical look at NATO and the Western support for Ukraine. And it all links in with this mindset of, well, America made this, the American intelligence made this huge error about weapons of mass destruction. So that means everything they say from this point onwards isn't true, might be wrong, etc. And that's a whole other topic in itself. But it's sort of this weird kind of contrarian thing. So if you find information that goes against conventional thinking and somehow lines up with something you're thinking, it can lead you down these, as we call them, rabbit holes. And yeah, there does need to be something done about these algorithms, because they target people. And companies, social media companies, we're the product. They're making a fortune out of us and that content, because social media and YouTube, etc., is designed for people's attention. It's not so much about the quality of the content. It's just about what drives engagement, what keeps people interested. And typically, look at media of the old days, newspapers, etc. Sensationalism sadly sells, and sensationalism online sells.
Tabloids.
So it's conspiracy theories. It's sort of stuff about celebrities doing bad things or embarrassing things, or then the state-backed propaganda where, we've talked about this before, Russia spend about $1 billion a year on misinformation efforts, and China spend about $6 billion on disinformation efforts targeting the West. And obviously YouTube's going to be, and social media is going to be a component of all that. And so people need to be so careful about what they consume online, and always be asking, who is this person who's speaking to them? What do others say about them? What have they said in the past, and how does that stack up with what you kind of know to be true? Obviously, that gets a bit murky now, but it shouldn't. But what's accepted reality, should we say? And that usually, by asking those questions, gives you an idea quite quickly of reasonably how accurate people are. Because even there are some mainstream commentators with regards to politics who make very wild claims, and then after the fact turn out to be completely baseless, and it's not good. So yeah, got to be really careful. Now there's one other thing I was going to just add, if you don't mind. I was just googling why teenagers. So I went to Google why do teenagers turn to extremism, and this page came up from the Devon Safeguarding Organisation, which is part of the UK government's Prevent scheme. And they have some interesting info about children at risk. So I'll just quickly read out some points here and then leave them with you guys. So children at risk of radicalization may have low self-esteem or be victims of bullying or discrimination. They may feel isolated and lonely or wanting to belong. They might be unhappy about themselves and what others think of them. They might be embarrassed or feel judged about their culture, gender, religion, or race. They might be stressed or depressed. They might be fed up of being bullied or treated badly by other people or by society. They might be angry at other people or the government. They might be confused about what they're doing, and there might be a pressure to stand up for other people who are being oppressed. Now, radicalization doesn't happen overnight, the website points out. It's sort of a gradual process, so young children who are affected may not even realize what's happening, a bit like the boiling the frog analogy, where the frog doesn't realize it's being boiled until it's too late. And even then, with regards to extremism, by the time you kind of cross over, you see yourself as right and everybody else is wrong. So that's the other interesting thing of extremism. So extremist groups often target young people via the internet and social media, and the process might involve being groomed online or in person, exploitation, including sexual exploitation, psychological manipulation, exposure to violent material and other inappropriate information. And obviously Twitter, etc., is very easy to see terrible pictures from the front line of Ukraine and things. I mean, I've seen more dead babies thanks to Twitter than anything else in my lifetime. And as an adult, I find that really sort of difficult. So as a child, imagine seeing that. Then also there's a risk of physical harm or death through extremist acts, which is a part of that process as well. And then radicalization, they add, can be challenging to spot, but the signs that could indicate a child is being radicalized include a change in behavior, changing their circle of friends, isolating themselves from friends or family, talking as if from a scripted speech. So if you get any speeches at the dinner table, that could be a sign there. Unwillingness or inability to discuss their views, a sudden disrespectful attitude towards others, increased levels of anger, increased sensitivity, especially around the use of the internet, and then obviously accessing extremist material online, using extremist or hate terms to exclude others or incite violence, and then lastly, writing or creating artwork prominent to violent extremist messaging. Now, they do add, however, these signs don't necessarily mean a child is being radicalized. Sometimes it might be part of normal teenage behavior, but it can be a sign. Yeah, but it can be a sign that something else is wrong. So I think, I'm not a parent here, but I suppose one would think it might be a good idea once in a while, in a non-sort of challenging and non-judgmental way, just to have a chat with your kid about the world and just ask them what their sort of views on things are, just so you can kind of get a vibe check every few weeks, few months, just to see, like, 1 month they were really, like, I don't know, liberal, and then 2 months later they've gone very illiberal. That might be a sign of many things, but it is definitely a sign of a change. So it might be interesting to say, well, hey, 2 months ago you believed this. What caused you to change your mind? It's not necessarily wrong, but why did you change your attitude? What led to that? What did you watch? What did you see? Maybe you could share something with me, and see if your kid can kind of convince you to change your views, and see where they're coming from, because that might, you never know, it might well bring up something that might be a cause for concern, or it might not. But easier said than done. And I'm not a parent, so feel free to ignore that advice. But to me, it makes sense. But anyway.
One more point here that I think is really that Farah and Jacob make in this article here. They talk about, where was the term that they use here? A youth quake, where they say that any sort of effort towards counter radicalization here has to be really centered within Gen Z itself, within young people. Young people are, I think we can all remember, predisposed to do what they think will be popular, predisposed to go with the flow and sort of do what they think everyone else is doing. And when you fall into one of these extremist spaces online, it's very easy to at least have the false illusion that, that there's this community around you, that this like-minded community that feels and thinks the way you do, right? And I think for a lot of these people, for a lot of these kids, I should say, that's exactly what they're looking for. So, they use this example here about the March for Our Lives movement that followed the Parkland school shooting in Florida, where I'm sitting, in 2016. And, so it's easier, I guess, for these young people to perhaps resist these extremist currents if there's a bunch of their peers around them, in their social media feeds and stuff saying, hey, it's not cool to do this. This is a problem. It's not just like the olds, saying, hey, kids, don't do that. That's not cool. It's much more effective if the voices speaking out against it are from within those same age group. They are their peers.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the counter to that is obviously a lot of extremists who reach out to young people are not too of a dissimilar age. And if anything, especially with the ISIS recruits, you hear about how some of the people who went out and joined ISIS from the West were then used to recruit others. So yeah, I guess it's always healthy to try and think back to what it was like when you were a teenager, and what it, and how easy it is to feel a bit isolated. And I guess the other thought I was just having is sometimes your child's friends are kind of an interesting, give you an interesting insight into maybe what your child is thinking, or their lack of friends too. Are they, do they have any friends? And if they don't, that
their
could
lack of friends in real life.
If their entire
if their entire social life is entirely virtual, is entirely on these online spaces, that is a lot harder to see. I'm sure 99% of parents would feel pretty uncomfortable if ISIS members or neo-Nazis knocked on the door and say, hey, can your kid come out and play? That's not happening on social media. You don't see that.
No, exactly. And it's not that obvious. It's not like a man dressed as a Nazi knocks on the door politely and asks that question, or a man dressed like Osama bin Laden's going to turn up at the door asking for your son. It doesn't work like that. So
you don't even see it.
No, and these groups are smart as well. I think the other thing people forget about extremist groups, they're intelligent, they're smart, and they know how to hide in plain sight. And that's the thing. So just to add to your stress levels listening, this is one of the facts of the world that we live in today, is that there are these bad actors out there who do operate in plain sight, and one has to be careful about it. Yes. Anything else you'd like to add to that?
I would just say that I think this is really hard to do. This is really hard to get our arms around this.
Yeah,
it would be much easier if social media companies weren't designing their products to accelerate these issues. That would make it, we wouldn't have nearly as big of a problem. And it seems like probably not that big of a fix. I mean, I've said on here a couple times that, tech bros try to create the illusion of simplicity around issues they want to fix, which usually translate to they want to make money off of it. And they create the illusion of complexity around issues that they don't really want to be bothered with. Oh, it's really hard to figure out this problem. No, it's not. You just don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. Well said. Well, let's take a break and we'll be right back with our next story. Right, hello again. So welcome back, everybody. So now we're going to look at the Telegram founder, Pavel Durov, who was arrested in France. And so I think it links quite nicely a little bit to what we were saying before, because Telegram has a bit of a reputation. We'll put it that way. So Pavel Durov, who was born in 1984 in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg, is a Russian-born tech entrepreneur who co-founded Telegram with his brother Nikolai in 2013. The app is known for its focus on encryption and privacy, and it's amassed over 950 million users globally. So that's a lot of people. Durov left Russia after conflicts with the government regarding user data, and Durov now resides in Dubai and holds a dual citizenship with the UAE and France. Telegram's popularity stems from its commitment to encryption and privacy, with Durov promising never to sell user data or the platform itself. However, the app has faced criticism for not applying end-to-end encryption by default, and it has become a hub for extremism and criminal activities. So despite Telegram's effort to combat content like child abuse and terrorism, the platform's hands-off moderation has made it more attractive to various groups, including far-right movements and criminal syndicates. So kind of pretty much backing up your last point in our last segment there, Matt, that this hands-off approach is letting all sorts of bad actors run amok on this platform. With 950 million users. So Durov's recent arrest in France relates to the platform's failure to moderate harmful content, particularly child abuse material. French authorities, including President Emmanuel Macron, emphasized that the arrest was a legal matter, not a political one. The investigation is focused on Telegram's lack of cooperation with law enforcement in addressing issues such as child pornography and organized crime. Telegram has defended itself, stating that it adheres to content moderation practices aligned with industry standards and that Durov frequently travels in Europe. The company maintains that neither Durov nor the platform should be held accountable for the misuse of the app by its users. So, Matt, what are your thoughts on that? Especially that last point about the platform not being held accountable for the misuses by its users. I'm very interested in that bit.
I have a point that I want to make there in a second, but I don't really use Telegram. I have it on my phone. I have an account on it, I believe, but I don't really ever use it. And no particular reason. I just don't have a need to. Yeah. Usually when I speak to people overseas or something that, is not quite, fit for iMessage or something, I use Signal personally. I don't know if you do. I believe Signal. I believe Telegram's a lot more popular overseas than it is in the US. I know for some people, like if you look in Russia and Ukraine, parts of the Middle East, I mean, Telegram is like the entire way that they communicate with the outside world. Like it is the internet for some people, the way that WhatsApp is for a lot of people in like the developing world. I believe, that's like what they have. As far as this, whether it's an issue of like encryption or privacy or free speech or something, I mean, I've said on here before that I do believe that people have the right to privacy and to have a space in the virtual world online where, they are truly alone, whether with themselves or who they, want to communicate with. That said, facilitating crimes on a platform, whether that's selling arms, organizing extremist groups and plots, whether that's sharing child pornography, which definitely came up in this case on Telegram with Pavel Durov. That's different from free speech. Yeah. And I think that even is a level beyond just, content moderation. I mean, that's the sort of thing that I don't know. After this arrest happened, you had a lot of the usual suspects like Elon Musk and everything sort of, come out and say, oh, they're going to be arrested too and executed next time they go to France or whatever. I'm like, no, this isn't about you. Like, shut up. Yeah, this song is not about you. This is, again, probably another one of those issues of tech bros who want to reap the rewards of a free and open society without feeling that they have any responsibility towards it. Yeah. Like if you created this platform that is being used to traffic child exploitative materials, right? And you just refused to respond to law enforcement requests or anything to tackle this. I mean, don't be surprised when they knock on your door, or when you walk off the private jet and they, put handcuffs on your ass. I don't feel that has anything to do with free speech, with the, open sharing of ideas. I don't feel that has anything to do with one's right to privacy. It's about the facilitation of horrific crimes, the coarsening of society, and a government's duty to its citizens to put a stop to it. And if you, by your refusal to help law enforcement get a grip on it, essentially become an accessory to those crimes, right? And I think, if you know that this is being done on your platform and you refuse to do anything to stop it, or at least allow law enforcement to stop it, you are an accessory to what's happening on those platforms. And I think it's entirely right that that you would be punished for it. I don't no one else to sort of say about it, but I think what this is really about when it comes to exploiting children, selling arms, extremist groups organizing, that has nothing to do with free speech. And if you think that those issues fall under some category of free speech, I don't know what to tell you, but you and I do not have the same definition of free speech.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I think just going back to your earlier point about sort of these tech bros, I think that they're all happy, and I think this might be an issue of our age, and hey, maybe I might sound like an old man at this point, but there's a lot of people who enjoy the benefits of our society at the moment, but want to take no effort at all in actually holding up the principles of our society or taking responsibility for things. And I think people in the tech sector have been incredibly guilty of this, is my feeling.
Or want to delude themselves into believing that the billions that they have made, that these huge global corporations that they have built, is entirely just because they're really smart.
Yeah.
They're so much smarter and so much better than anyone else. And it has nothing to do with the transoceanic fiber optic cables, with the police and fire departments that will respond if their data center catches on fire.
Yeah.
With the decades of unprecedented global peace and prosperity that we have had in the post-war era that has allowed them to do these things. And because of that, you have an obligation to society.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I think on this society thing, I think sometimes it's better to think of it on a small scale. It's like if you move into a new block of flats, like, where I live, we now have a WhatsApp group where people can kind of point out what isn't working, and then there's a concierge who then keeps an eye on that, and there's a sense of accountability. So if there's a light that's broken, you can go onto the WhatsApp group, say a light block blah 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 is broken, and somebody will fix it and stuff like that. And then there's a sort of general sense of how one should conduct yourself where we live, so you don't have music blaring at 3 a.m. or whatever. And that's sort of kind of keeping our little community kind of civilized, I suppose. There's a certain, there are certain accepted rules en masse, and, those who violate it kind of, get a warning. Not a lot happens, to be honest, but they accept that they have to adhere to a certain group of rules to benefit from the kind of the nice and pleasant environment that we're in. And obviously people do violate that from time to time. It leads to moaning, etc. But that's the thing. And I think, so when you think about it on a bigger scale in a country, as you just pointed out, like all the roads, the fire department, all the emergency services, the education you receive, the fact that you live in a society that there isn't generally an armed insurrection happening every few years, etc. You don't have tanks rolling down to London or Washington to try and overthrow the government every few years. That shouldn't be taken for granted. And I think sometimes
it's not
it
an
is
accident.
Exactly.
That was created, by our society, and because of that, you were able to be a multi-gajillionaire and build this, massive tech platform. It's not just you.
Yeah.
You are not the main character, as much as you may want to believe you are. You are not.
Yeah, exactly. So I think tech bros who feel they're not, that either they're too smart or whatever to concern themselves about society and those around them, I think are just deluded. Now back to our kind of the platform itself. I mean, should the owner be held responsible for what people do on that platform? I'm somewhere in the middle on that one, because it's a bit like whoever invented paper is then held responsible for everything people write on paper. You can't be, really. But I think with regards to the platform itself, obviously, is the platform doing everything it can to cooperate with the police, etc., with regards to criminal content like child pornography, selling illegal weapons, etc.? obviously when it gets into this sort of speech territory, that's where it gets a bit murky. But a lot of the time, it's not as murky as people make it out to be. If somebody is just making hateful statements, and it's more like on the broadcasting side of Telegram or Twitter, etc., where they're making terrible statements about a particular group of people and demonizing them, etc. That's a clear that's hate speech, not free speech. Freedom of speech is more about, I think XYZ president sucks and they shouldn't be in power anymore. And and the government's not going to come and knock on your door at 3 a.m. and say, "Why did you send out this tweet about the president?" Now, if you threaten to kill the president, that's a different matter. But if you just say this president sucks and I don't believe in him, and I don't know, I'm going to vote for somebody else in the next election, that's fine. And we're very lucky that we live in a society at the moment where that is okay. Those things could change, and I think what makes that easier sometimes for people to change is when then social media platforms don't take any responsibility for what's going on in the kind of bubble they've created, the online space they've created for people to do things. And then the other issue I think when people are in positions on Twitter, etc., where they're in a kind of broadcaster mode now, they're in a kind of position where they can broadcast whatever they think to a lot of people and they can make claims.
And tip the scales, yeah.
That's where I think then the individual should be subject to scrutiny. And I think, that's where you kind of get into this sort of territory of being a broadcaster. And obviously broadcasters are subject to, in the UK, to Ofcom, etc. And we had an interesting thing recently where with the riots that happened, some members of the public and even a member of Parliament, I believe, were charged. And I can't remember the wording of the charge, so I apologise because it happened whilst I was away on this Buddhist retreat. But they were charged for sharing inflammatory content online that was known to be of no substance, but was designed to inflame sensitivities and incite this riot. So I don't know whether that's the future of things or not. But I don't think... So with regards to Durov's arrest, I'm not really sure... Durov, if he was arrested just for the company not taking enough action to deal with criminality, I understand that. But if he is being arrested for what other people are doing with regards to sharing their views and stuff, then I think that is quite a murky territory. And it's a very fine line that one has to tread with things like this. But I just don't think tech bros make it any easier because they most of the time take zero responsibility, especially Elon Musk at the moment with the kind of content that's on their platform. And if anything, Elon Musk got out of his way to have more inflammatory content on his platform because, again, as we said earlier, sensationalism sells and is all about engagement. And the more you're online on Twitter battling with whoever, the more you're engaged on the platform and the more you're spending time on it and the more your data's being sold, the more advertisement you're subjected to. I mean, I don't know about you, but my Twitter... I get random posts show up in my feed from people I don't even follow, and I think some of that is pay for clicks, etc. So it's I
don't use on Twitter the for you page. I don't use it because it's heavily tilted towards a lot of that stuff, and it just doesn't bring me any value. If I want to hear what someone is saying on that platform, I'll follow them.
Exactly.
I don't know, but I think is what you're saying about. Are the creators of these platforms responsible for the content on them? I think in the case of Telegram, if law enforcement comes to you, let's say, you created this platform. If law enforcement comes to you and says, hey, these groups on your platform are trading in materials that are exploitative of children, and you say, okay, and what do you want me to do about that? Because of free speech or whatever, this is just a bulletin board that I created, then you are responsible for it. You're sort of becoming an accessory to the continuation of these crimes.
Yeah.
And I think it's fair game that law enforcement, then you are standing in the way of law enforcement's ability to put a stop to it. And if you're doing that, they're gonna go through you. And I think that's sort of what happened here to an extent.
Yeah, indeed. One interesting thing that popped into my mind as well, which I forgot to mention, was the fact that obviously Telegram is popular in Russia, and primarily it's popular for people who are against Putin or who are against the war. And obviously then the dilemma is, because the Russian authorities consider that terrorism, don't they? And obviously not all police forces and all law enforcement are equal. And
it's also used by the Russian military
yeah.
and a lot of pro-Kremlin voices as well. I mean, that's why Pavel Durov left Russia for Dubai, because he refused to give the FSB, refused to give the Kremlin a backdoor into the system. And now I don't know all the ins and outs of it. I believe there are some doubts as to what sort of visibility Russian security services have into Telegram. But yeah, it's interesting that it is used sort of by both sides of the conflict quite extensively.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, isn't it? So, yeah, so it very complex issue, but I think there probably is some common sense ways to make it a little bit simpler. But arresting the owner of the platform is an interesting step, and so we will see where that kind of goes, really. I don't think there's anything else I'm going to add to that, but is there anything else you want to add, or are you happy with that?
Nope.
Okay.
We're good to move on.
Well, let's move on to US influencers in the pay of Russia, which is an interesting one.
Yeah. So this is this sort of, the article that we're talking about is from the beginning of September. References a few raids that happened last month, and a few other sort of actions that are still sort of ongoing. So very much sort of a moving target here. This is from an article in the New York Times by Stephen Lee Myers and Julian Barnes. Here's some key points from it. Last month, the FBI raided the homes of two prominent American commentators with ties to the Russian government, Scott Ritter and Dmitry Simes, as part of a broader investigation into Americans linked to Russia's state television networks. The inquiry is aimed at curbing foreign influence on the upcoming U.S. presidential election, focusing on potential violations of sanctions and lobbying laws. U.S. intelligence has identified efforts by Russian state media, such as RT, to influence the November presidential election. The Kremlin's propaganda outlets are accused of supporting Donald Trump's candidacy and disseminating information targeting President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. The investigation raises legal and political questions, particularly around free speech protections. The targeting of individuals working with foreign state-run media organizations may intersect with First Amendment rights, complicating the Justice Department's case. The investigation is centered on potential breaches of economic sanctions imposed on Russia and violation of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, or FARA, which requires Americans to disclose lobbying activities on behalf of foreign governments. The Justice Department's crackdown reflects growing concern within the Biden administration about Russian interference. The investigation may lead to further searches and possible criminal charges, although the scope and ultimate targets remain clear. So that's something that, so the two men here who are named, Scott Ritter and Dmitry Simes, they have not yet been charged with anything, but their homes were raided by the FBI.
Yeah, indeed. So US influencers potentially in the pay of Russia, color me shocked. We've talked about this on the podcast before. Now, what we have talked about as well is Russian state media and how it's different from Western media. So Western media, even the BBC, isn't completely 100% state-controlled like Russian media is. So outlets like Russia Today, etc., have zero independent editorial oversight. They are controlled very tightly by the Kremlin, and they have been for some time now. And if you ever want to watch Russia Today, you'll see very quickly it pushes a lot of pro-Kremlin and anti-Western talking points. And one crude thing I saw once was you see endless videos about how terrible America is, videos that really heighten the homeless issue or the failures of the Vietnam War, or I don't know, failures in the war of terror, or conspiracy theories about how the deep state are doing terrible things. And then you'll see lots of like nature documentaries about Russia and how wonderful the cooking is, etc. And so it's quite quickly seen there's something not quite right with this picture here. And I did an episode on this podcast with Dr. Chatterjee Doody back in late 2021 about how Russia Today, or RT, pushes Kremlin propaganda in the West. And to me, obviously this is a very well-known fact. And one interesting thing about the commentary of what we're discussing is I'm surprised that there are some people out there today who are unaware that RT, or Russia Today, is state-controlled and pushes propaganda. It feels like some people have kind of missed the talking points of 2020 and 2021, and we're kind of back in that place again. And there's an interesting thing in the article as well about, like, there could be Russian intelligence officers among the staff at these Russian media outlets in the West. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and I bet there would be, definitely. And it's like, and even if it's not the staff are actual active intelligence officers themselves, they might well be recruited assets or people, favorable people put in positions of power within those organizations, and with a FSB, SVR, stroke GRU handler to steer them and report back. So to me, it's a little surprised that the Russian government has sort of selected and targeted influencers and maybe even hired presenters who, sort of push certain talking points they like. And so what we're talking about at the moment with this particular case is it's been found that it's people on the alt-right of American politics who are the ones in the pay of the Kremlin. Now, these individuals, some of the individuals who've been brought up have, are saying that they're not aware that they were receiving Russian money. And that might well be the case. They might not have been aware of it, because usually this is where that term sort of useful idiot comes in. So typically with an influence operation, they don't just sort of happen naturally. They have a bit of planning, and Russia have these departments that have look at each target country and look at points of contention that could potentially be exploited by their propaganda efforts. It's been going on since the Cold War, this, in different ways. So like how AIDS was considered secretly a bioweapon created by the CIA in Africa and stuff like that. And these conspiracy theories are still believed today. So what they do is they find these points of contention, and then they look at who's in that space these days, who is online pushing those points, and then they will find a way. So with the particular case in question, there was a media company that was formed that then kind of hired these people on the alt-right. Now, the people on the alt-right were working for a company. They didn't know that this company was a front for...
You're talking about Tenant Media.
Yeah, that's it. They didn't know that that's their Tenant Media receiving money from Russia, and to many respects, I doubt they ever would know that. But they were hired by this company to kind of do what they do, and obviously they carry on doing their thing, but there'll probably be some stories here or there editorially that might be pushed their way, or that they're naturally already talking points such as anti-woke, or being critical of the support of Western support of Ukraine, or being anti-NATO, etc., that kind of just naturally align in. And we've said this before, Russia likes to present itself as this, the savior of the white Christian world. So anti-woke talking points are very popular, both with a Russian audience and an American audience on the right. So there's a lot of kind of common ground these days with that kind of area. So it doesn't surprise me at all that those influencers did become kind of agents of influence without realizing it. And then with regards to Scott Ritter, I don't know if he is knowingly working for the Russians or not, but he definitely loves to push pro-Russian talking points and anti-Western talking points. And obviously the FBI know he's got a criminal record, and maybe that influenced their decision to search his house or not. I don't know. But it's, he's a very murky character, Scott Ritter.
Well, let me, so you're sort of about two different sort of facets to what it seems like the Department of Justice is being sort of really proactive. I'm thankful for this, being really proactive to call out these Russian attempts to sort of influence the conversation around our election. Yeah. So the two men who had their homes raided by the FBI recently. So Scott Ritter, who I'm sure is somewhat at least known to many of our listeners. He's sort of been around in this space for a while. He's a former Marine Corps intelligence officer, UN weapons inspector. He's been charged twice with attempting to contact underage girls online. Not a very nice guy. I feel very comfortable saying that. He's also been outspoken on Russian state, on RT, on Russian TV itself, as sort of the, Kremlin's token American who will say that, U.S. foreign policy is the root of all evil in the world, and Putin's right to call Ukrainians Nazis, etc. That sort of thing. Dmitry Simes, probably a bit less known. So he was born to prominent Soviet human rights lawyers. He emigrated to the U.S. In the 70s, and from 1994 to 2022, he headed up a think tank called the Center for the National Interest. He was actually picked by Richard Nixon, who founded the center, to lead it back in the 90s. Symes was named over 100 times in the Mueller report and helped arrange Trump's April 2016 speech at the Mayflower Hotel in D.C., where he sort of outlined a much a newer vision of U.S. foreign policy that was much cozier to the Russians, of course. Then sort of as part of the DOJ pushing back against this, but somewhat a bit sort of a different scheme that they revealed. So you were just talking about Tenet Media, this production company, I guess, that was taking money from Russia Today, I believe. And so they had hired, Tenet Media had hired a bunch of right-wing influencers, right-wing influencers for like Benny Johnson, Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, to produce basically videos on their YouTube channels that were like straight up parroting pro-Kremlin talking points. And of course, when this was revealed, a lot of them said, oh, I had no idea where the money was coming from. I didn't know that I was working on behalf of essentially Russian state TV. I mean, they were making serious money, like $400,000 a month to produce like one video a week, which I would love for,
oh man,
maybe not to take that money from the Russian government, but if there's anyone else out there with the pockets and really loves what we do that much, call us. Maybe if you don't work on behalf of a hostile foreign government, so we have examples of someone like Scott Ritter and Dmitry Simes, who are like sort of, it seems, knowingly working on behalf of Russian state TV, which would, violate sanctions. So like the U.S. government doesn't recognize Russia Today as a news organization. It's like a state, lobbying arm of the Russian government, right? So to work for them would, potentially be a violation of FARA. They're not registering as foreign agents. Whereas, these guys like Dave Rubin, Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, and the Tenet Media thing, they say, did not know where the money was coming from. But it's part of a much, broader effort by the Russians to influence our politics, both through covert and overt means. And it seems like this time around, the DOJ isn't really afraid to name and shame and push back on it, even if that involves, kicking down doors and bringing charges potentially. I mean, I think back in 2016, it was famously like they saw these efforts, but were sort of afraid to be seen as partisan, to state the obvious that all of these efforts were toward the benefit of one political party, and specifically one candidate of that party. Seems like we've at least, thankfully, a decade later, pretty much learned our lesson.
Yeah. That previous situation was a massive mistake. But there we go. So just a reminder, so obviously the goal of Russia and other autocratic governments such as China is to undermine democracy and throw the whole idea of it into question. And Russia and China use influence campaigns online to spread disinformation that causes us to doubt our own political systems and to fight amongst ourselves with the goal to weaken us. So, yeah, that's the kind of thing that's sort of going on in our information space at the moment. So one has to be very, very cautious. So, I'm sadly not surprised that something's come out. And, you might find people the other side of the political spectrum too, the kind of anti-war side of things, who've also been very anti-NATO and anti-Western support for Ukraine. We may have some information that comes out about them in the near future as well. So we will see. No side of the political spectrum is free from this risk, really.
No. Yeah.
No.
Absolutely.
No. Was there anything else to add, Matt? Or are you happy with that?
No, I'm good. I'm good with that. If you want to move
Cool.
on to the
Yeah.
last one.
Yeah. So let's just take our second break and then we'll be right back. We are back. So we're now going to look at our final piece, which is about the heads of MI6 and the CIA appearing on stage together for the Financial Times in the UK. And well, I had some serious FOMO with this. Funnily enough, that Financial Times event, I did look at an advert for it a few weeks ago. Now, the talk itself, in our defense and my defense, was totally, it was a surprise. So if I'd got a ticket, I would have had no idea that they were going to show up. But it was quite an expensive event to go to, so that's sort of what put me off going. So I don't know, I'll have to now keep a close eye on these things or reach out to these organizations and see if we can somehow cover events like this. But anyway, the head of MI6 and the CIA, so Sir Richard Moore, who's the head of the MI6, and William Burns, who's the director of the CIA, were together on stage, and they've warned that the international order faces a significant threat comparable to the Cold War. They highlighted the ongoing war in Ukraine and an assertive Russia under President Putin's key concerns. Both countries, the UK and US, stand united in resisting this aggression. The intelligence chiefs revealed that they have foreseen the Ukraine conflict and had shared classified information with the international community to support Kyiv. I remember a while back, a lot of people kept saying that the war in Ukraine was a massive intelligence failure on the US's part. And it's like, not really, because America have done a lot to keep an eye on what Russia are up to and be warning their allies and Ukraine. And how even in the summer before the invasion, I saw U-2s were flying around the area, keeping an eye on things, as were Global Hawks, etc., thanks to flight radar. So no, there's definitely not an intelligence failure on the Western part. I think there was on the Russian part, because they thought that this war would be winnable in a very short space of time, but that's a whole other matter. The heads of MI6 and the CIA then went on to discuss efforts to disrupt Russian sabotage in Europe and address tensions in the Israel-Gaza conflict and counter-terrorism, and particularly the resurgence of the Islamic State. At the public appearance at the FT Weekend Festival, Burns acknowledged Ukraine's recent gains in the Russian territory as a tactical victory, but said that Putin's grip on power remains firm. And MI6's head said not to confuse, I'll just find it here, a firm grip with a stable one. So that's a interesting observation there. And then beyond Ukraine, both intelligence services see China as the main geopolitical challenge of the century, and they have reorganized their agencies to prioritize China whilst also working to de-escalate conflicts in the Middle East, and including efforts towards a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. So, Matt, what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I was traveling most of the day yesterday, so I didn't have time to watch this whole video through. I think it was good to see them together on the stage. Certainly very, very rare. I'm unaware of, at least in a public setting, where they've done this before.
No, we had Burns gave a speech last year in the UK, but he was alone. And I think the only comparable events are the ones they've done at each other's headquarters so far. So I think this is I believe this is a historic first, having both on stage. That's massively different from the past.
Happy to see them. I'm happy to see the heads of these intelligence agencies at least taking more of a public facing role. I think it's ultimately probably to the benefit of the public's perception of these organizations and what they actually do, that the public is able to see them and to hear them talk about these issues, that they're not just sort of these like shadowy, sort of faceless, nameless organizations that you would watch any number of very silly movies or something and think that they're like these omnipotent like evil forces in the world. So I'm good to see. I'm glad to see them speaking to the public more about these issues. I mean, I think you're definitely right. I don't know that we are in another Cold War yet with that new sort of like authoritarian axis between, China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, et cetera. But we're definitely moving towards there. I think the way that, the Cold War uh, between the US and the Soviet Union sort of dominated the latter half of the 20th century and probably, most of the adult lives of, the generation before us. I think this will be the geopolitical struggle that dominates ours. I think this is just sort of like a new normal that we're in. Like I've said in here before, that I think like the 90s, at least, where there was no great geopolitical competition, was an aberration. And to look at that as something that was sustainable, and definitely, like the end of history, this is where I was going to be forever now. Haha, we won. I think it's just born of just arrogance and a lack of imagination. And I think the world is definitely reverting back to what is probably the actual norm, which is geostrategic competition between the great powers of the time. And for at least for now, it's between small d democracies and autocracies.
Indeed. Yeah. Well, no. I thought the event was very positive. So to your point about it being sort of public facing, I suppose, not to reassure the public, but just to give give a bit more transparency. So Richard Moore said that this event was as much about earning your license to operate in a democracy as anything else. And then was it
that's great?
Yeah, I thought so. And then the interviewer jokingly asked, "Is this a recruitment drive?" And they sort of chuckled along about it. And I think there is an element of that too. I also noticed the two chiefs looked very relaxed in each other's company, and Director Burns' body language was very positive and pointing towards Richard Moore. Because when I studied acting, it's an interesting thing about watching how people cross their legs. If somebody crosses their leg away from someone in the opposite direction, then it shows a bit of defensive-ness. But I noticed Director Burns crossed his leg pointing towards Richard Moore, which indicates comfort and, respect and just being generally relaxed in his company. So I think, if anything, this event gave a bit of a vibe check about the two directors and showed that they didn't come across as these sort of Machiavellian, Jason Bourne, villainous CIA people. And if anything as well, one other point they brought up was about the sort of humanitarian side of what they do. And certainly with these two individuals, it did feel like that was quite important. And Director Burns, as we talked about before, has been very busy on touring around the world and all the trouble spots, negotiating with the Taliban, negotiating.
Basically the Secretary of State.
Yeah, which it has caused some controversy. I had a guest a while back saying that why is the director of the CIA doing that and not Anthony Blinken or something? So,
they're able to speak to people in a way that is not entirely public facing, right? They're able to move around a lot more quietly than perhaps the Secretary of State is with this, big bubble that follows them around. There's also people that aren't too savory, whether it be, Hamas, in the example of these negotiations around the ceasefire and the hostage deal, that we need to speak to, or to be able to have conversations, whether that's through an intermediary or something, that the CIA or MI6 or one of these intelligence services is sort of naturally predisposed to do well. There is between professional intelligence officers and these services, there is sort of a respect and ability to speak bluntly that can be constructive around these things.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it does, because espionage is an extension of diplomacy, and people sometimes forget that part, and so it does enable these sort of backroom discussions that are not policy-making discussions either. If anything, again, it's sort of a vibe check, and obviously then you have your spies who can confirm what somebody just said to you or what somebody's been saying to the president, etc., and confirm whether that's actually believed or whether it's even true. So it's very interesting that. So it all helps with sort of negotiations and build that sort of geopolitical picture with a degree of sort of clarity. So yeah, and one other thing that came up, which was kind of interesting, was about the CIA and SIS or MI6's cooperation. And on the special relationship, Richard Moore talked about how both agencies do share more information between themselves than they do with any other agency because of the high levels of trust between the CIA and SIS. And he also mentioned that there are some operational opportunities that both agencies would look at, and they would they would ask who was best placed to handle that opportunity using what is known as the best athlete model, which is just basically who is best placed to go after that opportunity in a non-competitive way. So I thought that was very interesting. And yeah, I thought it was brilliant talk. And obviously they can't share everything of substance, but I just think with talks like that are quite good just so you can get a sense of the people and just know what that person's sort of temperament is like. And there were quite a few left field questions thrown at them, some funny, some not. And I think Richard Moore handled those a bit better than Director Burns sometimes. But he
doesn't seem like a very I don't know, bubbly kind of guy who would be throwing jokes around and stuff. But I mean, that's fine.
He seems very business orientated, but in a very sort of polite, sort of non-aggressive way. So yeah. Yes, that's us done for this episode. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening. We're going to move on to Extra Shot, and there'll be a link in the description for that. And also, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we've got this ongoing survey that will end this month, and so if you want to participate in that survey and just give us your thoughts on the show, it's anonymous. So just click on the link in the show notes to the survey, and you will get taken straight there. And it takes probably only a couple of minutes, really. I mean, most of the questions are open, so it really is down to how much you want to say, really. But it's quite a quick survey, I think, and it's just helping us. Understand what works well, and if there's anything we need to kind of improve on, any tweaks that we can make going forward, or are there any particular topics that we haven't covered yet. That's come up a couple of times. There's a very much an interest for some non-Five Eyes stuff as well. So we're going to look into that. We'll see what we can do on that front and deliver on that. So our goal really is, we want to make season 9 the strongest ever, and as we're saying before, we are slowly transitioning into video and paying a bit more attention to our neglected YouTube channel. And again, I apologize for that neglect, but we are going to be correcting that over this year coming forward. So thank you again, everybody, for listening, and we will catch you on Extra Shot. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. This is Secrets and Spies.